Originally from what is now southeastern Connecticut in the United States, the Mohegan are an indigenous people. In the past, they had strong relations to the nearby Pequot, from whom they split off in the early 17th century, and they belonged to the Eastern Algonquian linguistic and cultural family. The Mohegan call themselves the Wolf People, and kinship, spirituality, and a reverent relationship with nature are fundamental components of their traditional identity. Through language preservation initiatives, communal life, spiritual practices, and oral tradition, the Mohegan people have preserved their cultural continuity over the ages. This page focuses on the Mohegan people as an ethnic and cultural group, separate from any one political or legal institution, even if many of their ancestors are currently members of tribal organizations that have received federal or state recognition. Community members continue to honor and practice the Mohegan language, traditional lifeways, and ceremonies because they see cultural preservation as an ongoing generational duty. The Mohegan name comes from an Algonquian phrase that means people of the wolf. This name captures the wolf's spiritual and metaphorical meaning in Mohegan cosmology, where it is linked to kinship, power, and loyalty. The wolf, which appears in oral tradition and ceremonial activities, is frequently seen as a teacher and a protector. Beginning in colonial papers in the 17th century, the name Mohegan has been used in English sources ever since. Due to variations in dialect and transliteration, spelling variations, such as Mohegan or Mohican, were frequent. Even though the terms Mohegan and Mohican are frequently used interchangeably, they designate two different indigenous groups with unique histories, lands, and cultural identities. Traditionally, the Mohican, often written Mohegan, dwelt in the upper Hudson River Valley in what is now eastern New York and western Massachusetts, while the Mohegan are centered in what is now southeastern Connecticut. Because of their comparable linguistic and geographic origins, the two peoples share some cultural characteristics and speak languages that belong to the Eastern Algonquian branch of the Algonquian language family. Nonetheless, the two tribes retain different political and family structures and evolve separately. Due to phonetic similarities in their names, early European authors frequently were unable to differentiate between the groupings. One of the first Europeans to write about both peoples was the Dutch colonist Adrian Block, who made a clear distinction in his writings between the Mohicans, Mohican, and the Mohicans, Mohegan. Later centuries saw this misconception persist. For instance, early documents at Dartmouth College refer to Samson Occam, a Mohegan pastor and educator, as a Mohican, even though he is well known to be Mohegan. The Pequot and Mohegan peoples had a common ancestor. Both tribes are thought to have been a part of a broader coastal Algonquian-speaking population that made the journey south from the upper Hudson River Valley and other interior areas before European contact. The Pequot and the Mohegan were two distinct but linked identities that this group had developed by the early 17th century. Early colonial documents frequently used the name Pequot to refer to a variety of groups in southeastern Connecticut, notably the Mohegan. However, the knowledge that the Mohegan and Pequot retained distinct leadership traditions and ceremonial customs, even prior to official governmental divides, is preserved via internal kinship relationships, clan systems, and oral histories. The Mohegan-Pequot language, comparable agricultural and subsistence lifestyles, and spiritual beliefs based on reciprocity with nature are shared by both peoples. It is better to view their early separation as a divergence rather than a total cultural rupture within a broader cultural continuum. Early in the 17th century, when intertribal hostilities were on the rise and colonial influence was growing, the Mohegan and Pequot were formally divided. Oral tradition and documents from the colonial era indicate that a Mohegan chieftain by the name of Uncas founded a separate village near the Thames River in modern-day Connecticut after seceding from the Pequot sachem, Sasakus. Uncas's separation was a cultural declaration of Mohegan identity as much as a political effort. He and his supporters placed a strong emphasis on kinship teachings and ancestral ties to the land, which they felt were being undermined by Sasakus's centralized power. With the preservation of their ceremonial life and community administration in accordance with Mohegan custom, The new Mohegan village at Shantok developed into a physical and spiritual hub for the populace. Mohegan oral history portrays this division as a necessary restoration to traditional norms, although colonial forces frequently saw it as opportunistic or politically advantageous. According to these teachings, Uncas is claimed to have broken the arrows of peace with Sasakos, signifying the reaffirmation of Mohegan independence as well as the termination of their political oneness. In the end, the division allowed the Mohegan to maintain their own cultural identity while navigating early colonial partnerships on their own terms. After breaking away from the Pequot, the Mohegan people settled permanently along the Thames River, most famously at Shantok, a fortified community that functioned as a political and cultural hub. The leadership of these early societies was based on tradition and consensus, rather than centralized authority, and they were structured around networks of extended families and administered by a council of elders and sachems. The Mohegan scholar, public thinker, and clergyman Samson Occam, 1723–1792, was among the first recorded literate Mohegans. Despite the fact that his extant works are in English, Occam was proficient in Mohegan and is said to have utilized the language in preaching and instructing. He is a symbol of the persistence of indigenous identity in a colonial setting, and his writings and sermons represent the Mohegan worldview and experience. In recognition of their cultural value, Dartmouth College formally returned Occam's personal documents, sometimes referred to as the Occam Papers, to the Mohegan tribe in 2022. Fidelia Hoscott Fielding, 1827–1908, preserved the Mohegan language at a period when it was no longer commonly spoken, a century after Occam. Fielding, a direct descendant of Uncas, was renowned for her calm defiance of assimilation demands and led a traditional Mohegan lifestyle. She recorded Mohegan words, phrases, and grammatical patterns in 4 journals that were phonetically transcribed in English. In addition to their grammatical importance, these writings are prized for their contribution to the preservation of worldview, metaphor, and oral tradition. As such, they have emerged as key sources for the modern revival of the language. The way the Mohegan language is interpreted and reclaimed now is still shaped by Occam and Fielding's combined contributions, which stand for continuity throughout centuries of cultural upheaval. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, serious attempts were made to revive the Mohegan language by utilizing both contemporary linguistic techniques and traditional knowledge. The preservation efforts of individuals like Fidelia Fielding, whose phonetically written diaries offered important insights on grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary, form the basis of this work. Additionally, larger Eastern Algonquian language reclaiming initiatives have influenced modern revival. Jessie Littledoe Baird, a Mashpee Wampanoag tribe member and co-founder of the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project, has had a significant impact. Through her work with MIT linguist Ken Hale, she created methods for resurrecting Algonquian languages that are grounded on comparative study and historical texts. The Mohegan community's own reclamation approach has been impacted by these techniques. Currently, the group is studying, reconstructing, and teaching the Mohegan language. Mohegan linguists and cultural workers have created educational materials, such as digital tools and a Mohegan dictionary. Programs for instruction have a strong emphasis on cultural context and intergenerational transmission, with the goal of restoring traditional ways of speaking and thinking in addition to teaching vocabulary. Even though the initiative is still in progress and there are still few proficient speakers, revitalization is seen as essential to the survival and continuance of culture. The Mohegan people characterize their language as a live manifestation of their identity, family, and worldview, rather than as a historical artifact. As a result, language reclamation is viewed as a kind of cultural rehabilitation rather than just an academic endeavor. The core of traditional Mohegan spirituality is a reciprocal and balanced interaction with nature. The creator, sometimes known as Mundo in English, is viewed as an omnipresent force in the cycles of nature, society, and thought rather than as a remote entity. Animals, plants, and geographic characteristics are respected as components of a common cosmology, and all living things are seen as connected. The interdependence of previous and future generations is a fundamental idea in Mohegan religion. Decisions are usually made with the influence on the seventh generation in mind, and elders are respected as custodians of memory. Oral storytelling, seasonal rituals, and the meticulous preservation of family information are all ways that ancestors are honored. Spirituality permeates every aspect of everyday life. It is integrated into human interactions, land care, and food preparation. Practices are transmitted by social transmission and lived experience, rather than being formally formalized in a philosophy. While certain elements of Mohegan spiritual practice were impacted by Christianity during the colonial era, many indigenous beliefs and ideals have endured, frequently in parallel or hybrid versions. The trail of life, a metaphorical route that symbolizes the bond between the past, present, and future generations, is a central idea in Mohegan spirituality. It is believed that this trail stretches 7 generations, both ahead and backward, situating every person within a broader chain of memory and duty. It is expected that decisions made now would respect the sacrifices made by forefathers and safeguard the welfare of future generations. This paradigm guides cultural behaviors, including naming, land care, and oral storytelling in addition to spiritual contemplation. Elders are seen as mentors on the journey, and their lessons are crucial to assisting the next generation in living a dignified and well-rounded existence. The trail of life may be invoked during rites of passage, such as births, coming-of-age celebrations, and funerals, and it is occasionally portrayed in ceremonial art and regalia. The idea upholds a fundamental Mohegan principle. Identity is a communal inheritance molded by shared history and responsibility rather than an individual's property. Historically, Mohegan's ceremonial life has synchronized spiritual practice with natural, lunar, and agricultural cycles by following the rhythms of the seasons. Several important customs have been preserved or revived through oral tradition and intergenerational instruction, despite the fact that many events were interrupted or prohibited during colonialism. The green corn ceremony, a seasonal celebration of harvest, rebirth, and thankfulness, is one of the most significant traditional observances. This celebration, which was revived in the 20th century by Mohegan leader Emma Fielding Baker, commemorates a period of communal rejuvenation and spiritual purification, and includes food, singing, and prayer offerings. Rituals of naming, acknowledgments of coming of age, and ancestral remembrance are further ceremonial traditions. As acts of continuity, expressions of ideals, connections, and duties that link the living with those who came before them, ceremonies are seen as more than just happenings. As the main means of passing down history, morals, and identity from one generation to the next, oral tradition is essential to Mohegan cultural life. Stories are considered living lessons that include spiritual wisdom, useful advice, and ancestral experience. They are not only folklore or amusement. Relationships with the earth, lessons in balance or humility, and the roles of important cultural personalities and animals are frequently highlighted in these stories. Because they are the keepers of memory, elders are revered. They are frequently asked to speak at significant occasions or transitions, and their teachings are disseminated in ceremonial settings, familial settings, and community meetings. Recalling and recounting ancestral events is regarded as a type of spiritual continuity and an ethical obligation, in addition to being an issue of inheritance. Ancestors are frequently described by Mohegan people as being present and involved in day-to-day activities, providing direction through memory, intuition, and dreams. It is believed that the act of storytelling itself helps to preserve ties to the past and to fortify identity throughout time. In the matrilineal kinship structure of traditional Mohegan culture, inheritance and ancestry were determined by the mother's side. Women had a major role in family and communal decision-making, and children were taught family identification, clan allegiance, and specific social obligations from their moms. A council of elders and sachems, revered individuals selected for their knowledge, expertise, and community service, oversaw leadership. Sachems were supposed to behave in line with the needs and ideals of the populace, not as rulers, but as mediators of consensus. Their power was not derived from riches or force, but rather from their capacity to lead with poise and humility. Elders were essential to both education and government. Their observations influenced moral teaching, oral history interpretation, and ceremonial life. Elders were viewed by the community as guardians of custom and continuity, especially during periods of conflict or transition. This social structure placed more emphasis on interdependence, balance, and reciprocity than on strict hierarchy. With a focus on intergenerational harmony and harmony with nature, roles were flexible and determined by the needs of the community. Seasonal cycles and a varied habitat in the Northeast influenced Mohegan foodways. The inhabitants used a combination of farming, fishing, hunting, and foraging as part of their sustenance strategy. In addition to providing dietary support, this strategy strengthened the community's social and spiritual ties to the land. Traditionally, women were in charge of agriculture, which was focused on growing the three sisters: maize, beans, and squash. The interdependent system in which these crops were cultivated represented larger cultural principles of balance and collaboration. In order to preserve the health of the soil, fields were frequently situated close to settlement locations and rotated. Men conducted hunting and fishing, and these activities followed seasonal cycles. Fish, shellfish, and other aquatic resources were found in rivers and coastal regions, while meat and skins were obtained from deer, turkey, and small animals. Weirs, nets, and spears were used for fishing, frequently in group endeavors. The diet was augmented by foraging for wild roots, nuts, berries, and medicinal herbs. Knowledge of medicinal and edible plants was transmitted from generation to generation and was intimately linked to spiritual and ceremonial teachings. Food gatherings were infused with ceremonial and tradition, making them more than just practical. Offerings were frequently made before to a hunt or harvest, and certain customs were dictated by the phases of the moon and guidance from ancestors. The traditional usage and understanding of indigenous plants, or ethnobotany, has long been a vital component of Mohegan culture. In addition to food, plants were utilized for building, ceremonies, medicine, and tools. Orally transmitted and frequently protected by elders and medicine keepers, this information still influences cultural practice today. Acer saccharinum, or silver maple, was especially significant. Its robust yet lightweight wood was used to make tools and utensils, while its bark and sap were utilized to make medicinal teas to cure fevers and coughs. Particularly for its sap, which was cooked into syrup and sugar for both daily and ceremonial usage, the sugar maple, Acer saccharum, was highly prized. In spiritual practice, other herbs including tobacco, cedar, and sweetgrass were utilized. Tobacco was presented in prayer and thanksgiving, cedar was utilized in cleaning and protection ceremonies, and sweetgrass was braided and burnt in purification rites. Black cohosh, burdock root, and wild strawberries were among the medicinal and edible plants that were harvested periodically and utilized in accordance with custom.